Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves in a forest where the stew is bubbling, the bread is suspiciously sentient, and someone just found a piece of a treasure map floating in their dinner. You know, the usual. You're sitting cross-legged by a crackling campfire in the middle of the glimmering groves. A place so peaceful, birds sing in harmony, and even mosquitoes seem to respect your personal space. You've been hiking all day, chasing down rumors about a spoon-hating elf, and right when you were about to give up and eat another sad granola bar, a traveling merchant invited you to dinner. Big copper pot, hearty stew, free of charge. Too good to be true? Always. But you were hungry. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, drop your city and the current time down in the comments. I want to know exactly when and where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The stew smells amazing. Herbs, mushrooms, something slightly sweet. You lean over to scoop up a bite with a wooden ladle, and that's when you see it. A small, torn piece of paper floating between a carrot and what you really hope is a potato. You fish it out. It's damp, smudged, and written in a looping, slightly dramatic script. There's a crude drawing of a hill, a pine tree, and what looks like a spoon with an angry face drawn over it. Beside it, a single word. Begin. Right, because that's not creepy at all. The merchant winks at you. Looks like dinner's trying to tell you something, he says, and walks off like he didn't just serve you a soup that wants you dead, or at least deeply inconvenienced. Now, historically, food-based maps aren't super common. But they're not unheard of. Medieval sailors used to tattoo navigational routes on dried meat for edible memory aids, though historians still argue if that's just a gross myth or a prank that got way out of hand. But this feels intentional, like someone wanted you to find it. So naturally, you do the only sensible thing. Pack your things and head toward the place that looks the most like the weird hill in the drawing. You walk for what feels like hours, the trees getting taller and the forest quieter. Occasionally, you glance down at the soggy map scrap, half expecting it to dissolve into stew-scented mush. But it holds. The angry spoon stares back at you like it knows something you don't. By nightfall, you reach a clearing where the moonlight hits a single pine tree leaning slightly to the left, exactly like the one in the drawing. Beneath it, a little stone pedestal. And on it, unbelievably, is a perfectly clean silver spoon. You freeze. It's just sitting there like it owns the place. No guards, no magical traps, no dramatic music cue. Just a spoon. You pick it up, and nothing happens. No spark of prophecy, no glowing. Not even a whisper of enchantment. It's just a spoon. Solid, cool to the touch, balanced. But when you try to put it in your bag, it slides out. Try again. Slide. Again. Slide. You eventually duct tape it to your backpack. Not proud of it. Here's where it gets weird. Yes, we're just starting. As you walk away from the pine tree, the forest shifts. Like, visibly. Trees shuffle places. Moss moves in reverse. A stone blinks at you. You are no longer in Kansas, or anywhere remotely map-friendly. This kind of magic is called territorial enchantment. often used by ancient woodland tribes to keep outsiders out or trap them in. Scholars still debate whether it was defensive or just really bad cartography. Either way, congrats, you're officially lost. You sit on a log, pull out the spoon, and, just for kicks, hold it up like a wand. The wind rustles. A voice speaks. It sounds like sarcasm wrapped in velvet. So, you touched it. I assume you want answers, or maybe you just really hate forks. You spin around. No one. The voice sighs. Honestly, you people will stick anything in soup and call it destiny. And that, dear traveler, is the moment you realize you didn't just find a magical artifact. You found the start of a very specific, slightly petty, and definitely spoon-related curse. You blink into the moonlight, half expecting someone, or something, to step out and explain themselves. But nope. The forest just goes back to being dark and smug. The spoon is still in your hand, heavy, cold, disapproving. You consider talking back to it, but quickly remember you've already duct-taped it to your backpack once tonight, and that's probably enough public embarrassment for the day. Instead, you stuff it into your side pouch and keep walking. You've seen enough bedtime stories to know that mysterious voices never show up just once. They always come back when you least want them. Eventually, the trees start to thin, and warm mist drifts into the air. The ground under your boots turns soft, mossy, and suspiciously warm. A few steps later, the mist parts like someone opened invisible curtains, and you find yourself staring at a valley full of steaming pools, glowing pink stones, and an elderly man with silver hair sitting naked in a hot spring. He notices you, waves politely. Don't mind me. The sulfur's excellent for joint pain. You turn very quickly and look in the opposite direction. Cool. Just passing through. Oh, but you're not. You're here about the spoon, aren't you? Ugh. Of course he knows. You take a breath, carefully stare at a completely innocent rock and ask, "How do you know about the spoon?" The old man chuckles like you just asked him if clouds were wet. "My dear wanderer," he says, standing up. You do not turn around. "I'm Professor Margrave, former chair of arcane culinary anthropology. I've spent 93 years studying the great spoon refusal." Now, you do turn, but keep your eyes locked at chest level. "You mean it's real? The story about the elf who refused to use a spoon?" Margrave nods solemnly and begins climbing out of the spring with the grace of someone who's done this enough times to have invented his own towel spell. Oh yes, realer than most legends, and far more annoying to research. The elf in question, Prince Elion of Lunathil, made international headlines 3 centuries ago when he walked out of a royal feast because, quote, "I will not be reduced to slurping like a baby mole in front of foreign dignitaries." You snort. He said that? Word for word, carved into the table in 3 languages. Apparently, the entire dispute started during a state dinner between the elves and the dwarves, a gesture of peace. Bowls of imported beetroot stew were brought out, and every noble at the table received a long-handled silver spoon, except Elion. Why? Logistics. The dwarves didn't account for the elf's particular spoon grip style, which involved 3 fingers, a 37-degree wrist angle, and what he once called a flourish of dignity. Instead, Elion was given a slightly bent soup ladle. He looked at it, Margrave says, and said nothing for a full 5 minutes. Then he stood up, pushed his chair back, and left the room. Peace negotiations fell apart. 2 kingdoms nearly went to war. That's extreme. But history is full of petty drama, like how the Great Emu War wasn't really a war and still technically ended in favor of the emus. Or how ancient Romans used spoons with pointy ends not just for eating, but for picking wax out of scrolls. And nose-picking, which no one likes to talk about. But let's be honest, multitasking is eternal. Of course, Margrave continues, now fully dressed in an aggressively patterned robe, historians still debate whether Elion's refusal was about etiquette, principle, or a more personal issue. Such as, well, he says, leaning in, some scholars believe Elion suffered from a magical condition known as utensilium repellens, a psychological aversion to eating tools, often triggered by early childhood trauma. Like getting bonked on the head with a serving spoon? You don't say it out loud, but the idea seems oddly plausible. Margrave begins walking, motioning for you to follow. Come, there's a place we can talk, and I have an index of every known spoon-related diplomatic incident in the last 500 years. You raise an eyebrow. That's weirdly specific. Isn't it just? He beams. Now, let's see where this map of yours leads. You might be part of something bigger than you think. You pull out the damp, stew-stained paper. He studies it. Ah, I know this hill, and that tree, but this face? He points to the cartoonishly angry spoon. I think that's symbolic. Oh no, that's real, he says casually. It's the sigil of the Spoonless Pact. You stop walking. There's a pact? Margrave grins. Oh, my dear, there's a secret society, and they're still watching. You pause mid-step. A secret society of anti-spoon people? Margrave nods, utterly serious, as if you just asked whether gravity was still in effect. The Spoonless Pact, a closed circle of individuals who, for reasons ranging from ideology to indigestion, have sworn never to use a spoon again. You stare at him, waiting for the punchline. Is this some kind of culinary cult? He grins. Only on Tuesdays. You follow him deeper into the steamy valley. The mist curls around your boots like shy cats. The hot springs here seem to hum, low and melodic, almost as if they're trying to lull you into a very inconvenient nap. Margrave leads you into a hut made entirely of retired chopsticks and ethically sourced forks. Inside, the air smells like cinnamon and overachieving academia. He shuffles over to a shelf and pulls out a leather-bound book, roughly the size of a corgi. It thuds onto the table with historical gravitas. Volume 4, he says, blowing off a layer of dust. The Spoonless Insurgency and its cultural reverberations. You flip through the pages. Sketches of awkward dining postures, angry banquet hosts, and one disturbingly realistic image of an elf attempting to eat oatmeal with a leaf. You stop on a page titled The Night of 1,000 Stirrings. What happened here, you ask. Margrave adjusts his spectacles. Ah, yes. That was the night the elves formally declared spoons to be symbols of culinary oppression and threw them, by the thousands, into the River Gloss. The resulting clog was so bad, river trade stopped for a week. Fish still avoid that stretch of water. Apparently, The anti-spoon movement wasn't just a personal preference. It became a symbol. To some, it was rebellion. To others, a joke that got way out of hand. Scholars remain divided on whether the movement had genuine roots in traditional Elven customs, or if it was, as one dwarven historian bluntly put it, a very dramatic tantrum. Margrave flips to a map. According to this, he says, tracing his finger across a faded path, the symbols from your stew map fragment lead to the Lost Grove, a hidden sanctuary built by the first Spoonless Council. Let me guess, you sigh. It can only be found by someone who carries the spoon? He looks surprised. No. Anyone can find it. It's just very well camouflaged. The entrance is disguised as a public restroom that's always temporarily out of order. You blink. You're joking. He grins, partially. You pack up, say goodbye to the steam-humming springs, and head northeast. The sun begins to rise, soft, golden, too beautiful for someone who slept next to a rock last night. The landscape shifts from mossy and warm to dry and scrubby, with odd signs nailed to trees. No spooning after sundown, flatware free zone, and honk if you've denounced ladles. You can't tell if they're warnings or inside jokes. Either way, you're invested. Eventually, you reach a dusty town with one street, 3 goats, and an open-air night market that technically shouldn't exist in daylight. A merchant waves you over to a booth cluttered with cutlery and cryptic signs. You look like someone with complicated utensil feelings, she says. Excuse me? She gestures to your pack. That spoon. It's not staying quiet, is it? You squint. You can hear it? Not hear. Feel. That's an artifact spoon. Sentient, semi-sentimental, and extremely passive-aggressive. Probably bonded to you now. You sigh. Of course it is. The merchant leans in. I'll trade you something for it. You pause. Like what? She grins and pulls out a delicate fork carved from unicorn antler. This baby stirs, scoops, stabs. Multi-tool magic. Doesn't talk back. Tempting. But something in you knows you need the spoon. For now. Probably. Unfortunately. Instead, you offer her an antique, slightly bent dinner fork you picked up back in the professor's hut. She inspects it with the same reverence someone might give a vintage wine. I'll take it, she says. And in return, one night's lodging plus breakfast. But you have to earn it. How? Make me laugh. You blink. Dinner table rules, she explains. No fork, no spoon, no jokes. What's the point? So, under a canopy of paper lanterns and grilled cheese on a stick, you tell her your best tales. About the stew map, the talking spoon, the professor in the hot spring. She laughs so hard she nearly drops her kebab. You'll fit right in with the pact, she says finally, handing you a key tied to a teabag string. Sleep well, you'll need it. Tomorrow, the books fly. Books? But she's already gone. You look down at your hand, where the key now glows faintly, and feel the spoon shift in your pack like it just rolled its imaginary eyes. You are very much in this now. The key dangles from your fingers, warm and slightly vibrating, like it's got somewhere to be, and is annoyed you're not already there. The teabag string it's tied to smells faintly of chamomile and rebellion. You follow a cobbled path past silent street stalls and sleepy goats until you reach a squat little building wedged between two oversized barrels. A painted sign above the door reads, "The Dewey No System Library." Beneath it, in smaller, handwritten script, "Open when it feels like it." The key slides into the lock with a dramatic click, and the door opens with the sort of creaky moan that says, "Someone died in here, but probably of boredom." You step inside. The room is warm, dry, and eerily quiet. Floor-to-ceiling shelves? Nope. Instead, a single floating lantern drifts around like a very sleepy firefly. And hundreds, no, thousands of books flutter gently in the air, each flapping its covers like wings. They loop and dive in lazy spirals. It's basically a butterfly sanctuary, but with footnotes. You duck instinctively as a hardback titled Elven Dining Etiquette, a chronicle of passive aggression, buzzes by your ear. A gentle cough echoes from somewhere near the ceiling. You look up. A librarian, probably, is floating cross-legged in midair, sipping tea from a cup that never quite touches her lips. "First time?" she asks, peering over the rim. You nod, brushing a paperback off your shoulder. She gestures casually. "Mind the autobiographies. They bite if they think you're skimming." You blink. "Wait, are the books alive?" "No," she says. "They're enchanted with sentient indexing, but some of them took it personally." She drifts down to your level with the graceful indifference of someone who once levitated into a Nobel lecture and refused to explain how. "So," she says, "what are you looking for?" You pull out the stew map, now mostly dry and significantly soup-scented. She peers at it and raises an eyebrow. "Ooh, spoon lore. You've seen this symbol before?" "I have filed this symbol before," she says, walking across thin air toward a floating reference shelf marked Cursed Objects, Mildly Rude. She pulls a slim, dark blue volume out of midair. "Manifesto of the Spoonless Pact," it says. The cover is plain, except for a faint imprint of a spoon crossed out with a single, defiant slash. She opens it to a bookmarked page and reads aloud. "No more shall we scoop our truth. No more shall we stir in silence. We reject the curve, the cradle, the passive consumption. We choose action. We choose edges. We choose the fork." You stare. "That's surprisingly intense." She snaps the book shut. The early Spoonless were very into declarations. Also calligraphy. The movement started in Lunathil during the waning years of the Autumn Accord. Elven youth were disillusioned, tired of ceremonial meals where soup was always lukewarm and spoons were seen as metaphors for submission. It was part art, part rebellion, part really poorly timed culinary trend. History still doesn't agree whether they were visionaries or just very hungry, she says. Some scholars say the whole thing was fueled by a batch of hallucinogenic beet stew that went around during finals week. You ask if anyone ever proved the stew theory. She shrugs. Academia's split. Some argue the cultural movement had deep socio-political roots. Others say beets don't cause revolutions. One researcher tried to replicate the stew and accidentally opened a portal to a dimension where all utensils are made of jelly. So, mixed results. You ask if there's a way to track the pact, where they went, if they're still active. Not in the normal archives, she says. But, yes, there's always a but. If you can convince the reference tome to cooperate, it might give you a list of hidden locations tied to the spoonless movement. She points upward. You follow her finger to see a single massive book floating like a whale near the ceiling. It's the size of a love seat, and covered in thick leather binding so old it smells like someone's attic and an unpaid thesis. The tome doesn't like being touched, she adds helpfully, or spoken to, or looked at directly. You sigh. So how do I get information out of it? You ask nicely, and you offer a trade. You rummage through your pack. A pen. A pack of mints. A slightly bruised peach. And the spoon. The spoon shifts again. You can feel it watching you. You hold it up toward the tome. I offer this in exchange for knowledge. There's a long silence, then a low rumble. The tome opens itself, reluctantly, and a few glowing pages drift toward you like shy messenger pigeons. You read. There are 4 marked locations. The Sanctuary of Sharp Edges, the Forgotten Cafeteria. The Museum of Cancelled Cutlery. The Garden of Forking Paths. Beneath the last entry is a scribbled note. All roads lead to the final choice. Cryptic. Naturally. You thank the librarian, who waves you off with a lazy hey. You hike for most of the day, past lavender fields and uncomfortably judgmental squirrels, until you reach the outskirts of what once must have been a very fancy, very opinionated school. Stone arches stand like forgotten punctuation marks on the landscape. Moss-covered columns. Vines clinging to rusted signposts. One of them still reads, Royal Lunathil Finishing School for the Politely Inclined. Below that, a chiseled motto in Old Elvish. Margrave translated it for you earlier. One must never slurp louder than the wind. Poetic, useless, entirely on brand. You step through the gates into a courtyard choked with ivy and broken goblets. In the center, surrounded by shattered soup bowls and snapped teaspoons, stands a statue of a young elf with wild hair, arms crossed, chin lifted, and what can only be described as pure teen drama carved into his face. A plaque reads, Prince Elion. He ordered bread instead. You chuckle. This is the guy everyone's been talking about. He looks like the kind of person who would start a revolution over the wrong salad dressing. Which, given everything so far, checks out. As you look closer, you notice the statue's left hand is clenched into a fist. The right one? Palm open, like he's reaching for something. The space between them is empty, but shaped exactly like, a spoon. You glance at your backpack. The spoon doesn't move, but you feel the pulse of a silent nope radiating from it. The silence around the courtyard is deep and a little too focused. The kind that suggests either powerful memory magic or an overzealous dramatist wanted visitors to really feel the angst. You wander toward what's left of the dining hall, a place that once held diplomatic banquets, etiquette duels, and, reportedly, the single most passive-aggressive cheese fondue in Elven history. Inside, it's mostly ruins now. Scorched timbers, shattered chandeliers, a long table that's somehow still perfectly set with plates and forks. Only forks. You sit down at the head of the table, mostly because you can. The chair groans like it remembers better days. On the plate before you is a faded napkin folded into the shape of a question mark. You unfold it. There's a note. He didn't hate spoons. He feared what they meant. Goosebumps. Or maybe it's just drafty. Elion's rebellion wasn't random. Or theatrical. Okay, it was theatrical, but it had weight. He saw spoons not just as tools, but as symbols of submission, of being fed pre-approved truths in pre-approved quantities. A spoon is safe, curved, soft-edged, gentle. A fork? That's confrontation. It's bite. It's a weapon, a choice, a literal jab at the system. Historians still debate whether Elion's infamous lunch that day was a performance or a breakdown. He walked into the royal feast, ignored the ceremonial tureen, and instead tore into a loaf of bread with his hands. No tools, no pageantry. The nobles gasped. The dwarves applauded. And the rest. The rest is a history book nobody agrees on. There's one tale, largely discredited by traditional scholars but beloved by conspiracists, that says Elion had received a vision. A magical glimpse of a future where spoons were used to manipulate, not just soup, but minds. Feeding compliance, stirring obedience. It's dramatic, yes. Possibly nonsense. Definitely the plot of at least 3 underground puppet shows. You lean back in the chair and stare at the ceiling, what's left of it, and wonder, was he right? Or just really into performative lunch choices? A gust of wind kicks up the ash and dust. Beneath the table, something rolls. You reach down and retrieve. A wooden ladle, charred on one end. Carved into the handle, we needed a reason. Maybe the spoon wasn't the issue. Maybe the act of refusing it gave them purpose, a small, stubborn stand against a bigger, blander world. You tuck the ladle into your pack beside the silver spoon. They don't seem to like each other. That's fine. You're collecting a whole museum of bad dining energy at this point. Just as you're about to leave, you notice a cracked painting on the far wall. It shows Elion, not as a rebellious prince, but as an old man, smiling. No crown, no spoon. Just him, sitting on a log, eating stew straight from a pot with a crust of bread. Peaceful. Maybe he found what he was looking for. Maybe he just really, really didn't want to do dishes. Outside, the wind shifts, and you feel a tug. Not from the spoon, not from the map, but from something in your gut. Instinct. The next step is north, toward the hills that smell like garlic bread and wild thyme. The past has given you clues, but the future, that's where it gets weird. The hills ahead are gentle, but weirdly symmetrical, like someone tried to design nature with a ruler. The air is crisp, pine-scented, and tinged with something else. Roasted root vegetables, maybe? You follow the smell like a cartoon character floating toward a pie on a windowsill. Soon, you spot it. A crumbled tower surrounded by what was clearly once a royal campsite. Flagpoles, broken carts, and a suspicious number of spoons poking up from the ground like metallic weeds. You count at least 30 before giving up. Each one slightly bent. Each one planted deliberately, handle up like they were marking a grave. You approach slowly. There's a plaque nailed to a fallen log nearby. It reads, "Here fell the dignity of soup." Underneath, in smaller script, "Do not disturb the spoons. They remember." You back up just a little. According to Margrave's notes, this was the site of the infamous stew incident of 312, one of the weirdest diplomatic disasters in Elven history. During a high-stakes peace summit, a cauldron of ceremonial stew vanished mid-meal. Vanished. Gone. 1 second, it was there, bubbling gently. The next, poof. Nothing but a steaming outline and some embarrassed nobles holding empty bowls. At first, everyone blamed the dwarves. Then the dwarves blamed the pixies. The pixies blamed lactose intolerance. That was a weird day. But here's the weirdest part. The spoons were all left behind. And not just left. They were stuck into the ground, tip first, as if planted in outrage. Eyewitnesses claimed the utensils moved of their own accord, dragging themselves off the table like tiny soldiers going on strike. Historians still argue whether it was mass hysteria, a culinary protest, or just one very mischievous mage with a grudge against soup. Margrave had said, "We may never know." You carefully avoid stepping on any of the spoon graves and move toward the base of the tower. The entrance is half collapsed, but there's a narrow crawl space under a fallen beam. Naturally, you crawl through, because that's always a great idea. Inside, the air is cool and smells like dust, old parchment, and possibly leaks. The floor is scattered with broken dishes and a few very accusatory forks. At the center of the room, a shattered cauldron. And next to it, a chalkboard. Yes, a literal chalkboard. Like this was a classroom, or a planning room. You brush off some dust. On the board are scrawled diagrams of bowls, arrows pointing to strategic locations, and notes like no ladles after sunrise, and evacuation route, use the whisk tunnel. You take a photo with your brain because you have no phone here. Then something clicks. There's a drawing in the corner, a floor plan of this room, but with a hidden door behind the shelf. You glance over. The shelf is still there, somehow miraculously upright. You run your fingers along the side, knock gently, and feel the tiniest click. The whole thing swings open, revealing a spiral staircase. You don't even hesitate. You're way past hesitation now. You head down. The stairwell winds into a chamber lit by glowing jars filled with what looks like broth? Definitely broth. Golden, rich-smelling, probably still edible if you had a death wish. And at the far end of the room, on a pedestal, sits a document. You approach. The parchment is delicate but magically sealed. The wax stamp bears a familiar symbol, the angry spoon. You break the seal. Treaty of Utensil Neutrality. Your eyebrows climb. Apparently, the elves and dwarves, after the stew incident, agreed to a temporary moratorium on all ceremonial utensils. For 1 year, every diplomatic meal was to be eaten with bread, fingers, or edible leaves. No forks, no knives, no spoons. And during that year, 0 conflicts, no skirmishes, no snarky letters, no poisoned appetizers. Just peace. It was so unnerving that the agreement was quietly buried, and everyone went back to arguing about cutlery like civilized people. You close the scroll slowly, brain-turning somersaults. So maybe Elion had a point. Maybe taking away the tools made everyone equal. No one had the upper hand, or the sharper edge. The chamber begins to tremble slightly, as if your realization triggered a magic sensor. Dust falls. A low hum vibrates through the stones. You look around wildly and spot an inscription carved above the pedestal. Those who uncover the truth must stir it gently. Great. Now the building has opinions. You race back up the stairs, the tremor growing louder. The ground shakes like a dragon sneezing. You dive out of the crawl space just as the tower collapses behind you in a very cinematic plume of dirt and disappointed architecture. The spoon in your pack is warm. Too warm. You take it out. The surface glows faintly, and words begin to etch themselves along the handle. Find the Council of Crumbs. You sigh. Of course there's a council. There's always a council. You brush yourself off, dodge another spoon poking up. By now, you've developed a few useful instincts. Avoid glowing soup, never trust furniture that breathes, and always assume councils have weird snacks. So when you see a mossy trail lined with biscuit crumbs leading into a grove of twisted oak trees, you just nod and follow. No questions asked. The trail winds through dappled light and the occasional squirrel doing Tai Chi. After a while, you spot a clearing filled with rusted cutlery jammed into the ground like ceremonial spikes. It's weirdly beautiful in that this is probably cursed kind of way. In the middle of the clearing is a stone table, and around it sit 6 individuals. Not elves, not quite humans, not anything you can place. One looks like they're made of buttered toast. Another wears a cloak stitched from napkins. One has a fork strapped to their forehead like a unicorn horn. Another is drinking tea out of a mug that keeps trying to bite their nose. Yep, this has got Secret Council written all over it. One of them waves. Ah, the carrier of the spoon. You nod slowly. Hi. So, crumbs? The napkin-cloaked figure stands. We are the Council of Crumbs, keepers of fragmented truths and leftover truths too inconvenient to be served hot. You have questions. We have wildly unhelpful metaphors. Great, you sit. The Forkicorn speaks first. What do you know of the Spoonless Pact? You shrug. That it started as a protest. That Elion refused to use a spoon. That a stew vanished and everyone panicked. The one made of toast raises a buttery brow. And what do you believe? You pause. That maybe spoons aren't just tools. They're symbols. That taking them away forced people to eat differently and think differently. All 6 council members nod approvingly, which is objectively creepy. You half expect them to snap into choreographed applause. The pact, says the one drinking from the bitey mug, was never about the spoon itself. It was about choice. To scoop, to stab, to sip, or to devour. Freedom lies in the method. You ask if the pact still exists. Parts of it, they say. Some went underground. Some gave up. Some went corporate and now run a line of high-end, spoon-free tableware. You blink. Seriously? Oh yes. Very sleek. You can juice a mango without judgment. They explain that the spoonless movement fractured over time. Some believed in symbolic rejection, protest through absence. Others took it literal, banning all rounded implements, even soup bowls. The extreme faction once tried to burn every ladle in the kingdom. It was messy. Chunky stew everywhere. Academics still argue over whether the movement was sincere or performative. Revolution or recipe book with extra sass, as one professor put it. The napkin cloak figure slides a document across the table. You recognize the seal. Elion's sigil. This, they say, is the missing addendum, the final page of Elion's original declaration. Stolen, hidden, presumed lost in a stew-related accident. You unfold it carefully. We refuse the spoon not to reject nourishment, but to reclaim the way we receive it. The words are calm, measured, thoughtful, not the tantrum history painted. We've been preserving this truth, says Forkycorn, waiting for someone curious enough, stubborn enough, and mildly unhinged enough to follow the crumbs. You squint. Is that a compliment? The toast person grins. Yes, with a side of jam. You ask what happens now. They rise as one. Dramatic, of course. You've seen the symbols, followed the stew, heard the silence of bent spoons and the philosophy of forks. The next step is yours. Find the garden of forking paths. There, you'll choose. Choose what? That, they say, depends on what kind of meal you want your life to be. Before you can ask for directions, the toast council crumbles, literally, and vanishes into the wind. The napkin cloak drifts into your lap. The mug bites one final time and hops off the table. And just like that, you're alone again. The spoon in your bag is warm. No, hot. You pull it out, and new words etch themselves onto the handle. All endings begin with a choice. You tuck the napkin cloak around your shoulders, because, frankly, it looks good on you, and step out of the clearing. The trees seem to part before you. The crumbs have stopped. But in your hand, the spoon points forward, vibrating slightly like a tuning fork. It wants you to find the garden, and you, for better or worse, want to see what's growing there. The garden of forking paths isn't on any map. Naturally, but the spoon knows. It tugs at you like an excited puppy with opinions, buzzing, vibrating, and occasionally warming up your side pouch like a judgmental hot potato. You walk for hours. The forest grows denser, but not darker. If anything, the light gets weirder, more filtered. Every sunbeam feels like it's got a personal spotlight budget. There's a strange comfort to it, like the world is whispering, you're not lost, you're just dramatically early. Then you see it, a wrought iron gate covered in vines, guarded by a cat wearing boots. Literally, knee-high, leather, polished boots. The cat's also sipping tea and reading a book titled Brewed Wisdom, The Politics of Temperature in Magical Societies. He looks up without much surprise. You're late. You blink. I don't remember being scheduled. Everyone says that, the cat sighs. Come on in. Mind the time. It's sensitive this time of year. The gate opens with a creak that sounds like someone yawning politely. You step through. The garden of forking paths is beautiful in the way that makes you suspicious. The kind of place where flowers bloom in Fibonacci spirals, and the hedges trim themselves when you compliment them. Winding paths lead in every direction. Some brick, some moss. One that appears to be made of shortbread. I'm Clove, the cat says, walking beside you with the confidence of someone who's won arguments against furniture. I manage the garden and the tea. You glance around. What? Is this place exactly? Clove twitches an ear. Depends who you ask. Some say it's where choices go to grow roots. Others say it's where forks retire. All I know is everyone ends up here eventually, especially the indecisive. You reach a small courtyard. In the center is a massive round table carved from a single slice of a tree trunk. Laid out across it, spoons, forks, sporks, ladles, tongs, even chopsticks shaped like lightning bolts, each one glowing faintly. Welcome to the archive, Clove says. Here we catalog decisions, tools, intentions, consequences. Pick one up. See what you feel. You hesitate, then reach for a ladle etched with stars. It hums in your hand like it remembers things. Moments, meals, maybe heartbreaks soaked in broth. You put it down gently. Everything carries history, Clove says, even cutlery, especially cutlery. He hops onto the table and flicks his tail toward a path lined with lavender and basil. Elion came here once, stood where you're standing, stared at this table for hours. What did he choose, you ask? Clove shrugs. Depends who you ask. Some say he picked a fork made of flame. Others say he left empty-handed. One theory, he buried the spoon under the thyme bush and walked away humming. You smirk. Academic consensus still unclear, huh? Clove sips his tea. Oh, deeply. Half the scholars think he was a prophet. The other half think he just had texture issues. As you wander deeper into the garden, you start to notice plaques beside the paths. The road of It'll Be Fine. Shortcut to regret. Scenic route. This way to well, that escalated. Every turn a fork. Every fork a choice. Some leading to knowledge, others to comedy. One labeled leftover feelings and reheated decisions. You don't touch that one. Clove finally stops in front of a small stone fountain bubbling with soup. Yes, soup. This, he says, is the heart of the garden. And yes, it's edible, technically. You look down. Carrots, potatoes, gentle steam. There's a single wooden spoon floating at the top. It's your turn, Clove says softly. The pact began with rejection. But maybe it ends with understanding. You kneel, hands hovering over the soup. So what am I supposed to do? Clove smiles without showing teeth. Whatever feels right. Stir, sip, or just listen. You reach in. Your fingers wrap around the spoon. It doesn't resist. It doesn't glow. It just is. You stir slowly. Visions rise like steam. Elion, arguing with his father over etiquette and identity. The missing stew, the panicked diplomats, the quiet that followed when everyone finally stopped talking and started sharing bread instead of power. The pact was never about spoons. It was about the way we give and receive, how we feed others, and how we let ourselves be fed. You set the spoon down gently back into the broth. Clove nods. Good choice, he says. Now, time for tea? Always. You sit with Clove the cat, beneath a canopy of twinkling fairy lights strung between lemon trees that hum softly in B minor. He pours you a cup of tea that smells like cinnamon, nostalgia, and something you can't quite place, but definitely cried about once during your teenage years. You've done more than most, Clove says, curling his tail around a biscuit. Most folks stop at the stew, or the tower, or once their cutlery starts talking back. You take a sip. The tea tastes like something between home and clarity. So what happens now? Well, Clove purrs, you've got the addendum. You've held the spoon. You've made your stir. Next up is sorting out the nonsense that's been bubbling up in the outside world. You frown. You mean the conspiracy stuff? Clove nods. It's gotten messy. There's a rumor going around, peddled by someone at the Wandering Bazaar, that the entire Spoonless Pact was actually a cover for a dark culinary curse. Something about forbidden broth magic. You nearly spit out your tea. I'm sorry. Broth magic? Supposedly, Elion wasn't protesting utensils. He was trying to hide a recipe that could control people's minds through flavor. You blink. Clove refills your cup. Apparently, it started when someone found a spice jar that whispered secrets if you opened it near a pot of lentils. You stare at him. Please tell me that's not real. Clove shrugs. Hard to say. Some spices do whisper, usually insults. But the mind control soup, that's pure tabloid fluff. Still, it's causing problems. You look at the spoon resting quietly in your pouch. And people believe it? Oh yes, fully. The Wandering Bazaar is selling curse-proof utensils now. Dwarven tinfoil forks, enchanted gloves for eating with your elbows. It's a movement. So, basically, you sigh, my job's not done. Correct. Clove flicks a crumb off your cloak. You need to clear the air. Or at least, stir the truth back into the pot. He points toward the northeast horizon, where faint music and suspicious chanting drift from behind a row of peculiarly angry pine trees. The bazaar's in town. I'd recommend starting with the news tent. That's where they store all the curated narratives. 10 minutes later, you're standing at the edge of the Wandering Bazaar, and oh boy, it's chaos. Stalls selling enchanted ladle holsters, anti-spoon amulets, and one suspicious vendor offering spork exorcisms, 2 for 1. The news tent looms at the center. Made of patchwork banners and broken umbrellas, it's filled with scrolls fluttering in every direction and enchanted quills scribbling headlines mid-air. EF. Revealed as Soup Messiah? Utensil War 3 incoming? 10 signs your cutlery is possessed. You cough loudly. The nearest quill drops its parchment and floats over to you. Name? Traveler? Occupation? Soup theorist? The quill makes a non-committal squiggle and floats back. Someone behind you is yelling, "Spoons are just round forks. Wake up!" while handing out pamphlets with pictures of Elion dramatically photoshopped onto a soup can. You're not sure if you want to laugh or scream. Instead, you climb a stack of crates and whistle sharply. Everyone quiets, or at least pauses their ladle juggling. You pull out the addendum. Let them see the seal. This, you say, is Elion's missing statement. The one no one printed because it wasn't spicy enough for headlines. They lean in, you read it aloud. We refuse the spoon not to reject nourishment, but to reclaim the way we receive it. A beat of silence. Someone in the back murmurs, "That's kind of beautiful." A woman near the marmalade stand sniffs and says, "He just wanted to be heard, didn't he?" A spork vendor folds up his conspiracy board sheepishly. You continue. He didn't start a rebellion. He started a conversation about choice, about dignity, about soup, yes, but more than that, about control. One of the enchanted quills drops to the ground with a quiet plop. You hand the addendum to the bazaar's record keeper, a hunched gnome wearing 10 pairs of glasses, and he nods solemnly. "We'll archive this properly. Thank you." As you step down, Clove appears next to you, nibbling on a churro that definitely wasn't in his pocket earlier. "Well done," he says. You glance around. People aren't chanting anymore. They're talking, debating, eating, some even using spoons again, cautiously. I think they're listening. "Listening's a start," Clove says. Takes longer to unlearn what fear built. You look at the stars just beginning to poke through the sky. The spoon glows gently in your pouch, and for the first time in a while, it's silent. You wake the next morning inside a hovering bread cart. Yep, floating. Apparently, some genius at the bazaar combined sourdough, spellcraft, and questionable ambition. And now there's a whole line of levitating loaves for the discerning traveler. Yours is cinnamon raisin and vaguely judgmental. The cart descends gently onto a cobblestone lane outside a squat, chubby building shaped exactly like a baguette. A cheerful sign swings overhead. Ye Old Sky Toast, bakery and tactical carb provider. You blink the sleep from your eyes and remember the note Clove left tucked in your shoe. Next stop, the Flying Bakery. Trust the toast. You head inside. The smell hits you first. Vanilla, butter, nostalgia, and something that smells suspiciously like ambition on fire. A flustered halfling in a flour-dusted apron waves you toward a table. "Sit. Sit. Avoid the left booth." Still trying to dislodge a sentient bagel. "Coffee? Tea? Experimental jelly?" "Surprise me," you say, because apparently that's who you are now. Moments later, a plate lands in front of you, and on it, a single piece of toast. It's glowing. Not metaphorically, literally. Pulsing, golden orange, like it swallowed a sunset and is still chewing. And then, yep, it speaks. "I am Toast, bringer of truth and crunch." You blink. "Hi, Toast. I have been burnt. I have been buttered. I have seen things no bread should witness." You sit up straighter. "What exactly have you seen?" The toast's voice drops, dramatic and toasty. "I was there when Elion's final dish was served. I was the toast at the last unification dinner." You freeze. That dinner is the stuff of legend, the one where Elion supposedly reconciled with his royal family. Some say it marked the unofficial end of the Spoonless Pact. Others say it never happened at all. But the toast was there. "It was meant to be symbolic," the toast says. "A fusion of styles, spoon wielders and hand eaters, coming together over soup toast." Soup toast? A dish ahead of its time. Slightly soggy, utterly divisive. But Elion believed in it. He believed if he could create a dish that offended everyone equally, it might bring people together. That's bold. It failed spectacularly, the toast says, voice cracking slightly. Half the room spit it out. A duke fainted. One ambassador threw a plate and stormed out shouting, "We were promised bread or soup, not both." You wince. But Elion laughed, the toast continues. He said, "At least now you're not pretending to like it. That's something." Historians never recorded that line. Too messy. Too honest. The toast softens its glow. They buried the memory, it says. Too awkward. Too human. But that night, Elion made his final declaration, not in words, but in the act of serving something ridiculous, heartfelt, and completely outside the expected utensil dichotomy. You stare at it. He didn't choose spoon or fork. Exactly, Toast says. He chose toast, and in doing so, he chose neither. That tracks, because the garden didn't demand you use the spoon. It just wanted you to understand what it meant. But why am I here, you ask? The toast tilts thoughtfully. Because the world's still trying to decide what kind of cutlery defines it. And you, well, you've carried all of it. Forks, spoons, words, doubt, bread. Outside, you hear a sudden whoosh, like 50 toasters synchronized their disappointment. The building shakes, and a shrill voice yells, "The toast is rising!" You and the toast exchange a long look. "What now?" you ask. "Now," Toast says solemnly, "you ride." Moments later, you're clinging to the edge of the floating bakery as it lifts off the ground. The halfling baker tosses you a helmet shaped like a brioche bun and yells something about air yeast stabilization. The toast hovers beside you, flapping lightly on a saucer with butter-boosted thrusters. Your next destination? A museum no one likes to talk about. A place where once beloved utensils go to be forgotten. Where legends rust. Where forks whisper in sleep. The Museum of Cancelled Cutlery. You glance at your spoon, still tucked in your pouch. It doesn't glow. It waits. And somehow, so do you. The Museum of Cancelled Cutlery sits at the end of a weather-beaten cliff overlooking the sea of unwashed dishes. It's always foggy here. Not dramatically, more like the museum generates a personal cloud of passive-aggressive mist. You approach on foot after the airborne bakery gracefully crash lands into a pile of marshmallows. Toast survived. Obviously, the building itself is sad. Huge stone columns, once grand, now chipped. A rusted plaque near the entrance reads, "Dedicated to the tools we no longer reach for." Below it, scratched in by what looks like a spork having a midlife crisis, "We were useful once." Inside, everything is quiet. Too quiet. Not a comforting quiet. A museum quiet. The kind where every creak of your boots feels like you're interrupting a funeral. A greeter appears. Or, rather, rolls in. She's a sentient coat rack. Name tag reads Gilda, archivist of abandoned implements. She doesn't speak, but she gestures with one of her hooks toward the exhibits. You follow. The first room is labeled Utensils of Excessive Ambition. Glass cases display failed designs. A spoon with a tiny umbrella attached. A fork with 7 tines. a knife labeled the Negotiator, which also functions as a letter opener, wand, and marital dispute resolution charm. None of them made it. In the next room, politicized tableware. There's a scepter-shaped salad tong, once used in a royal coup where the dressing was poisoned and the croutons were spies. Beside it, a soup bowl engraved with slogans from the Great Garnish Rebellion. You lean closer. It reads, "Parsley is not a decoration. It is a declaration." A chill runs down your spine. The final wing is different, dimmer. The light here is candle soft and strangely reverent. The gallery of final meals. Each display shows a table setting exactly as it was found. Forks askew, knives discarded, spoons left half-dipped in unfinished bowls. You move slowly, reading placards with names, places, and stories. Then you see it. A velvet rope cordoning off one simple setting. A wooden tray, a piece of crusty bread, and a silver spoon. Your spoon. Your pack hums. You lift it out, and the air shivers. The spoon tugs gently, like a magnet drawn to memory. You step over the rope and place it onto the tray. The lights flicker. A voice echoes across the room. Not from a speaker, not from the walls, but from the air itself, like an old memory remembering itself aloud. She refused the soup, not because she hated it, but because she wasn't ready for warmth. A figure takes shape beside the table. Ghostly, regal, familiar. The Queen of Lunathil, Elion's mother. She sits silently, eyes on the tray. Her hands rest on the table, fingers curled slightly, as if still holding a spoon that isn't there. Clove had mentioned this moment. The last real meal served in the Elven court before it all fell apart. Rumor said the queen took one look at the bowl Elion brought her and simply said, "Not today." No record of what happened after, but now you're seeing it. She reaches forward, slowly, and lifts the spoon you just placed down. Her hand doesn't shake. She stirs once, twice, then vanishes. So does the tray. The lights steady. You realize something strange. You're crying, just a little. Not dramatic, just quietly moved in a way you didn't expect. Gilda. The coat rack offers you a tissue. It's floral scented. She's thoughtful like that. You walk out of the exhibit and find a bench under a stained glass window. The sunlight comes in colored stripes. Fork green, soup gold, fire orange bread. The spoon in your pouch is silent. Not dead, just satisfied. You get it now. Elion wasn't trying to destroy tradition. He was trying to stir it. To ask, what happens if we eat differently, share differently? And maybe the queen understood that. Maybe not today wasn't a rejection. Maybe it was an invitation to try again. Outside, the fog is lifting. You've got one location left. The garden gave you its truth. The bazaar gave you its noise. The museum gave you closure. Now it's time for the forgotten cafeteria. The place where it all began. A mess hall where peace was once served in ladles. And where, possibly, you'll find the answer to the final question. Why did Elion ever pick up a spoon in the first place? The forgotten cafeteria isn't on any official registry. It doesn't appear in enchanted atlases or show up on magically updated travel stones. You find it the old-fashioned way, by following rumors, faded lunch menus, and a suspicious trail of cracker crumbs shaped like tiny arrows. It's tucked into a fold of the mountains, behind an overgrown hedge that smells faintly of tomato basil and misplaced authority. The building is squat, wide, and unmistakably institutional. You don't need a sign to know this place once served awkward silences and diplomatic tension alongside underseasoned soup. The door groans as you push it open. Inside, the air is thick with the memory of boiled vegetables and secrets. Long rows of wooden tables stretch out across a dimly lit hall. Dust motes float like slow dancers. Trays still rest on some tables abandoned mid-meal. Forks turned sideways, napkins folded with battlefield precision. This is where the first unified banquet was held. The one that brought together elves, dwarves, pixies, humans, goblins, and one very confused dragon who thought it was a potluck and brought marinated roof tiles. The walls are lined with faded murals, depictions of joyful feasts, shared laughter, food flying mid-air in moments of ecstatic treaty signing. But look closer, and you see the cracks, literally. Forks snapped in half, spoons quietly painted over. One mural has a plate that's been scrubbed clean of all symbols, as if someone wanted to erase the meal entirely. At the far end of the room is a raised dais with a single, child-sized dining set. You walk toward it. There's a tray, a bowl, a spoon, and a folded note. The paper is yellowed but preserved by a faint magical shimmer. The ink is Elion's handwriting, loopy, theatrical, slightly smug. You read it aloud. I brought the spoon today, not because I've changed, but because they won't listen if I don't meet them halfway. This isn't surrender. It's a conversation starter. You sit down. You stir the imaginary soup in the empty bowl with the spoon. And you understand. This wasn't about soup, or cutlery, or even Elion's pride. It was about space. Making room at the table for other ways of eating, speaking, being. He didn't abandon the pact. He evolved it. He knew revolutions can't live forever on rebellion. They need translation. A bridge. Sometimes the spoon is that bridge. You glance around the room. No movement, no applause. Just quiet understanding. And then, footsteps. You turn. It's not a ghost this time, not a hallucination or an enchanted baked good. It's someone real, an elf. Tall, pale hair wearing travel-worn robes and a faint look of surprise. He nods at the spoon in your hand. Didn't think anyone would come back here, he says. You raise an eyebrow. And you are? Name's Thalen. I'm what's left of the Luna Thil Stewardship Circle. He offers a tired smile. We keep the cafeterias clean, and the stories a little less inaccurate. You smirk. So, you're a custodian of food-related history? Basically a janitor with trust issues and a complicated relationship with soup. He sits across from you and pulls out a faded parchment. On it, Elion's original menu for that first dinner. There were 5 courses, Thalen says, each one chosen to represent a different culture, each served with a utensil that wasn't native to the dish. You pause. On purpose? He nods. To force everyone to eat a little awkwardly, to talk about what didn't fit, to bond over discomfort. That's genius. Did it work? you ask? Thalin chuckles. Depends who you ask. The dwarves hated the salad tongs. The goblins threw theirs into the soup. But by dessert, everyone was arguing over which utensil was the least efficient, and someone used a pastry scraper as a spoon. That's when Elion stood up and said, "Now we're getting somewhere." You can see it, the chaos, the laughter, the beginning of something honest. Thalin reaches across the table and taps the spoon. "This isn't a relic," he says. "It's a reminder of how awkward, clumsy, and necessary understanding can be." You nod slowly. He stands. "There's one place left you should see," he says, "where Elion spent his final days. It's not far, and you'll need to hear what he said." You follow him out of the cafeteria, down a gravel path that smells faintly of time and memory. You've stirred the past. Now it's time to hear the final sentence. The path winds gently uphill, through a patch of wildflowers that look suspiciously like they're whispering gossip to each other. You keep walking. The air is thinner here, clearer. Even the spoon in your pouch feels lighter, like it's no longer bracing for some great revelation, but simply waiting for the moment to arrive. Thalin leads you to a quiet glen nestled between two rolling hills. At its center stands a small stone house, weather-worn and half-swallowed by ivy. A wind chime made from mismatched cutlery jingles softly by the door, producing a tune that sounds almost like a lullaby for tired revolutionaries. "This is where Elion came to retire," Thalin says, pausing at the gate. After the final peace accords, after he stepped down, after everyone stopped arguing over who should serve what to whom. You step inside. The house is cozy, modest, warm in that magical way where the fireplace never burns too hot and the cushions remember how you like to sit. You glance around and notice the lack of grandeur. No portraits, no scrolls, no glowing declarations chiseled into the ceiling. But there's a table. Of course there's a table. It's round, worn smooth by years of elbows, breadcrumbs, and casual philosophy. There are only 2 chairs, and one of them holds a familiar item, a spoon, carefully placed in the center of a small wooden tray. Next to it sits a notebook. You approach slowly. Thalin stays by the door. "I've never opened it," he says. "Didn't feel like it was mine to read." You sit, crack the notebook open, and begin to read the final words of Prince Elion of Lunathil. "I spent most of my life refusing things. Expectations, utensils, velour tunics. And while some of those things deserved refusal, others, not so much. The spoon was never my enemy. It was a symbol. But even symbols grow old, tired, and in need of redefinition. I used to think that using a spoon meant compromise, that if I allowed one curved edge into my life, I'd be swallowed whole. But over time, I learned that compromise isn't weakness. It's cooking dinner together and accepting that someone else adds too much garlic." You smile. It sounds like him. Dramatic, honest, hungry. We build peace not by erasing difference, but by accepting that awkward meals are still worth sharing, even when the soup's too cold, even when someone uses a knife to butter a muffin, even when the goblin brings a straw and nobody asks why. I use the spoon again, not every day, not always well, but I used it. And in that small act, I stopped being the rebellion and became part of something softer, not weaker, just warmer. You close the notebook. It's quiet in the house, except for the chime at the door and the soft rustle of pages settling into silence. Thalin walks over and places a small, folded cloth beside the spoon. "That's for you," he says. "You've carried the story. You've stirred it. Now, maybe it's time to serve it." You take the cloth and gently wrap the spoon. It doesn't glow this time, doesn't hum. It just rests in your hand, a piece of silver shaped by centuries of hope, hunger, and a prince who finally let himself sit at the table. Outside, the hills stretch wide and gentle. The path home feels possible. As you step through the doorway, Thalin claps a hand on your shoulder. "So, what'll it be for dinner tonight?" You grin. "Something we have to eat with our hands." He laughs. And together you walk down the hill, leaving the spoon behind on the table, where it belongs. For someone else to find, someday, when they're ready. You don't head back to the cities right away. Instead, you follow a winding trail down through the lowlands, past brooks that babble like distracted storytellers, and meadows where bees hum in a minor key. Your feet move on instinct now. Not because the spoon is guiding you, it's gone, but because the story is still unfolding, and your part in it isn't quite finished. You arrive at a quiet town with a name that sounds like a sneeze. The kind of place where everyone knows your laundry schedule and the bread still comes with a personal apology if it's underbaked. At the edge of the market square stands a small building with a peeling sign, the Museum of Everyday Meals. Inside, there are no grand exhibits, no glowing artifacts. Just shelves full of mismatched mugs, chipped bowls, faded placemats, and handwritten recipes passed down through generations who never once considered themselves historic. And that's kind of the point. You move slowly through the exhibits, stopping in front of one labeled "The Last Soup Elion Made." It's just a pot, a ladle, a faded napkin with notes like "less salt, more time," and "ask dwarves for those root things." There's no dramatic lighting, no plaque proclaiming destiny, just the honest residue of someone trying to get it right. And next to it, a wooden crate filled with spoons, all kinds, bent, polished, tiny, comically large. Some carved with initials, others smooth from years of use. A little sign says, "Donated, used, loved." A child nearby, probably about 8, picks one up and twirls it in their fingers. "Is this magic?" they ask. The museum guide, a tired-looking human with cheerful eyes, shrugs. "Depends on the meal." You leave quietly, heart weirdly full. The next day, you visit a school, not the finishing kind with etiquette drills, but a village classroom where the chairs wobble and the chalkboard is always 3 words behind the conversation. Today's topic? Symbols, how things mean more than they are. The teacher invites you to speak. You take a deep breath and tell them the story of a stew that carried a map, of a prince who walked away from a feast, of a spoon that refused to be just a spoon, of councils, toast, soup with secrets, and a garden where every choice is a fork in the road, sometimes literally. They listen, wide-eyed, occasionally confused. One kid falls asleep, but politely, and when you finish, a hand goes up. Did Elion ever get what he wanted? You pause, then answer. He got something better. He learned that the point wasn't being right. It was being real. The class applauds, some with actual clapping, some just slapping their desks enthusiastically. It's loud, beautiful. Afterward, the teacher hands you a sealed envelope. Found this in our donation bin last winter. No one knows who left it, but I think it's yours. You open it. Inside, a single photograph. Faded. Elion. Sitting on a rock, eating stew with his hands. Grinning like a man who finally understood the recipe didn't matter as much as who you shared it with. On the back, scribbled in looping script, use whatever you've got. Just make sure it's shared. You fold the photo gently and tuck it into your coat. Then you do what Elion probably would have done. You walk to the nearest food stall, order 2 bowls of something messy, sit down with a stranger, and offer them the better spoon. Because the rebellion might be over. But the meal is still going. The wind changes. Not in a dramatic, storms coming sort of way. More like a gentle shift. Like the air itself is sighing after a long, difficult dinner party that somehow ended with dessert and a decent playlist. You're back on the road, not chasing clues anymore, not following maps or glowing artifacts. Just walking, letting the journey exhale. Ahead lies a small campfire, already lit. You didn't make it. You don't remember anyone else being here. But there it is, flickering, warm, and smelling faintly of thyme and toasted something. You sit beside it. The flames crackle like they're catching up on gossip. You pull out a piece of bread from your pack and tear it in half. It's a little stale, but you don't mind. You dip it into the stew you heated over the fire. Simple, thick, not at all cursed. You eat slowly. You're not in a rush. There's no one chasing you. No cursed ladles or existential cutlery debates. Just dinner. And for the first time in a while, that's enough. The stars begin to show themselves. Not all at once, just a few brave ones. The sky pulls on its indigo sweater and settles in. You lean back and pull something out of your cloak pocket, the napkin from the Council of Crumbs. It's been folded and unfolded 100 times now, edges soft as memory. You smooth it out across your lap. And then, from somewhere just behind you, a voice. Do you get it now? You turn. No one's there. Of course. But the voice isn't hostile. It's familiar. Tired. Kind. Maybe Elion's. Maybe yours. Yeah, you whisper. I do. You stir the stew once, twice, without needing to think about it. In that moment, you realize the refusal was never about defiance. It was about honesty. Saying, this doesn't work for me, even when the table is full and the music's playing, and the soup smells exactly like your childhood. It takes courage to eat differently. It takes empathy to let someone else eat differently. And it takes real magic to sit together, with mismatched spoons and opinions, and still pass the bread. The fire burns low. You finish your meal. You don't lick the bowl, but only because there's company. You smile. You're going to tell this story one day, not with a grand speech, not with a glowing artifact, but over a meal, with someone you love, who maybe still cuts their toast into triangles and calls forks poke-bois. And that's okay, because this story, It was never really about the spoon. It was about the table, and who you invite to sit there. And now the story slows. The path settles under your feet. The wind wraps gently around your shoulders like a blanket that smells faintly of flour and quiet endings. The fire crackles softer. The stars are out in full now, blinking their sleepy Morse code above your head. You can breathe a little deeper. Let your muscles loosen. Let your eyes get just a little heavier. You've walked through history, through soup and song and small rebellions. You've listened. You've chosen. You've let go. And now, you rest.